In the first part of my presentation, I'm going to tell you a bit about Hamburg's approach in dealing with stormwater management. And in the second part, I will present to you 3 different international approaches, which are also dealing with stormwater management, and they are pretty similar to the things we already heard this morning and also this afternoon. First of all, some facts about Hamburg. Hamburg has a lot of open water bodies, and therefore we really have to deal with water or with stormwater. And the annual amount of rainfall is similar to Gothenburg and probably also to Seattle, as I just learned. And at the moment, we've got 1.75 million inhabitants in Hamburg. And Hamburg has always been a growing city, and what you can see here, the growth has happened over the last 100 years, more or less in the outskirts of Hamburg. And given the fact that we are still growing, the politicians decided that we have to provide 6,000 new affordable residential units each year, and this should be done by redensification of this inner city area. And in this area, we've got a combined sewer system. And this system is already 150 years old. And the effect, what can happen is, if we have more impervious surfaces and therefore more runoff, and the capacity of the sewer system can't cope with it anymore, more surface water flooding will happen and also more combined sewer overflows. And if we think about the effects of climate change, this can be even worse, also in Hamburg. And this is an image from the summer 2011, when we had a surface or this cloudburst. We are not as heavily affected as Copenhagen, what Elke will present to us this afternoon, but still we are thinking about ways how we can adapt towards climate change. And therefore, 5 years ago, this project has been set up. It's a project funded by the State Ministry of Urban Development and Environment Hamburg, and also from the municipal water company of Hamburg, which is called Hamburg Wasser. You probably heard of it before. And it runs until the end of this year, so everybody right now is really busy finishing all the plans that we need to provide for the politicians so that they can decide if we can continue with this project, if we can implement all the plans that we prepared in the last 5 years. So it will be really interesting for us what's going to happen in spring next year. And within this project, it's called RISA. It's a short form for Rain Infrastructure Adaptation. We have been working in 4 different groups, and we've been an interdisciplinary team. So the first group was focusing on urban drainage, the second one on urban and landscape planning, the third one on traffic planning, and the fourth one on river basin management. And our university has been involved in the second group, so we were really looking at urban and landscape planning aspects. And at the beginning of the process, our university set up a kind of a toolbox for an integrated stormwater management. And by using this term, we mean the interdisciplinary cooperation of drainage engineers, water managers, but also of urban and landscape planners, and also traffic planners. And I think we heard about this already from Seattle and from London and from other cities. And the aim of the project is to provide sufficient flood protection, water protection, and a near natural water balance. And what is missing so far at the moment, that because this project is led by engineers, they are not focusing so much on design qualities, what it means for the public space. And this is what we try to achieve, but we are still in the process. And we are looking at 5 different topics when we are talking about integrated stormwater management. The first topic are the planning instruments, for example, a zoning plan and things like this. We are also looking at new technologies, but they're not really new, but how can we integrate them into a sustainable urban drainage system? So we're looking at green roofs and multifunctional areas. There are a lot of discussions with the engineers if we can use it and how do we calculate the effects of a green roofs, but we are still in the process to do that. And it's also about financial incentives. The city of Hamburg has just set up a green roof strategy for Hamburg, and you will get from next year onwards subsidized if you build a green roof on top of an existing building. And we also have a reduced stormwater tax. I'm not sure if you heard about this before. This is something particular for Germany, I think. If you are implementing sustainable urban drainage systems on your private plot, you have to pay you can pay a reduced stormwater tax. So it makes sense really to think about this from the property owner point of view. It's also a lot about communication, but what we discovered is that we already have a lot of best practice examples in Hamburg, but there's still a lack of about talking the experience and how you can design it in a good way and what you might have to improve over the time. And it's also about legal requirements and policy. What kind of additional policies do we need, or do we have to change some of our policies? And this is all part of the project RISA. And one of my colleagues, it's Sabine Andresen, she was looking at the planning process in Hamburg. So when it starts from the design competition and the zoning plan up to the implemented project, what can happen in this period with the idea of a sustainable drainage system or an integrated stormwater management? And what we have at the moment in Hamburg, that nobody really knows who is responsible for all the aspects, different aspects related to water. It's very complex. Even the members from the local authority don't know. So that was really something we thought, well, it can't be, so we want to change this. And also the planners, they are not really aware most of the times about the aspects related to water, and also that they need to consider the effects of climate change into their design. So we really need to provide more professional training on this. And sometimes it's difficult to find good solutions within your boundaries of your project area, because you need to consider a wider area to find suitable solutions. And therefore, some of the projects can't be built because we can't manage the water on site. Sometimes the planners also don't look at the topography. And at the moment, we haven't got sufficient political backing. And this is what we try to achieve with all the plans we are preparing right now. And we definitely also need more monitoring of the implementation process. At the moment, we haven't got enough human resources to do so. And this is what can happen. This is definitely not a best practice example. During the design process, this was a green vegetated bioswale. And at the end, it ended up that the property owners decided, okay, we need more space. We want more these little garden huts. So they put it on top of the bioswale, and now it's a concrete channel. So the whole idea, the whole concept is gone. But this is also a best practice example. We call it demonstration project. And this is already 15 years ago. So we have quite a lot of experience in implementing sustainable urban drainage system, but we still need to explain it more to the members of the local authorities. And therefore, one of our recommendations are that we want to have an integrated water plan at a city-wide level, which doesn't only look on water aspects, but which also focus on urban landscape aspects and also in regard to design. And at the level of a zoning plan, we want to introduce a plan, we call it Wasserwirtschaftlicher Begleitplan. I couldn't translate the term in English. It's a typical German word, I think. It's a kind of a checklist that we make sure that the planner think about all the aspects related to water, that they think about the effects of climate change, that they have a look at the topography, and they might be able to think outside the box, so outside the boundaries they've got. And with these instruments, we want to make sure that we reinforce the value and significance of water during the planning process. And also one of our team has set up a guideline for design and construction, especially for schools, because at the moment the agency dealing with schools has about 1,000 projects running in Hamburg, only in Hamburg, for schools, because they have to change a lot of things by law. And some of the projects are small projects, they just have to change some windows, but some projects are bigger, they have to build new schools or new cafeterias for the schools, and therefore they have to rearrange the schoolyards. And we want to make sure that they think about stormwater management on site. So therefore it's a really important stakeholder for us to implement the idea in Hamburg. If you want, unfortunately it's only in German, but in case you understand German, you can download it from the internet. Also, some of the team has looked at different planning tools we need to provide to make sure that more people or more planners think about the whole idea of integrated stormwater management, and they prepared some additional planning tools and a GIS information system. And this is one of the plans they prepared. It's a map showing the infiltration capacity in Hamburg, because some people said, well, we can't infiltrate in Hamburg. It's definitely not possible. And you can see here the green areas are the areas where we can infiltrate. So in some areas it is difficult, but in other areas you have a lot of options to deal with stormwater. And based on this, they produced another map. And this shows if you are able as a property owner to disconnect your private plot from the sewer system so that you can get the reduced stormwater tax. And I think this is really an important step, because we have got quite a lot of single houses, so low residential housing in Germany, but what they have missed so far, here you can see these are the streets. They said, well, we can't disconnect the streets at all. They are all red. And I think this is something we should have a closer look at, and this is what I did within my PhD project. And here you can see it's a typical image from a highly dense inner city urban area, typical situation for a European city, where we've got a high ratio of impervious surfaces, very small plots, and hardly any space to implement any kind of sustainable urban drainage system on site. And what are we going to do with these inner city areas, because they are affected badly by climate change? So therefore, I think we really have to focus on public space, and I think the United States are already doing it, but we in Germany, and especially in Hamburg, we are not looking at that at the moment. And if we have to change our sewer system or to transform it somehow, why don't we use the money to enhance the urban fabric at the same time? It might not be the only solution, but it might be an additional solution. And therefore, I was looking at different, I call it large-scale design strategies. So means that it's a strategic approach in dealing with stormwater management, and you think about the design quality for the urban fabric at the same time. And this design strategy applies to the whole city, but you can also see it at the end at the project, if it will be implemented. So this is the initial situation, especially in the highly dense inner city areas, where we've got a high ratio of impervious surfaces. As soon as it starts to rain, even if it's an extreme rain event, we have surface water flooding, and we also have a combined sewer overflow, because most of these inner city areas are drained by a combined sewer system. So I had a look at different cities. What are they doing? And one option is to turn grey permanently into green, and this is what we heard from Seattle as well. And I had a look at the case study New York. Here you can see it's a typical picture from Manhattan. We've got a high ratio of impervious surfaces, very densely built, and a lot of public space, or especially roads. And what they did, they started with a green infrastructure plan. For each catchment within the city they had a look at and checked where can they implement sustainable urban drainage system. And they started to have a look at the different urban structure types they have. So if they have, for example, industrial areas or semi-detached houses or commercial buildings, so whatever. And what they found out, that it's easy to think about the public rights of way, because this is 30% of the area. So it really makes sense to adapt these areas or to retrofit these areas. So what they did, they put, this is initial situation again, so they put a green network on top as an additional layer on the urban fabric. And here you can see, we heard about this program, I can't remember anymore, 1 million new trees in New York. And this is what they did. They planted additional trees, they added some infiltration measures along the streets, and they also created new parks, or they redesigned existing parks. And with all these measures, they are able to infiltrate more stormwater on site. And with this, they can reduce the surface water flooding and also the combined sewer overflows. And here you can see some images. This is a typical green street. And these are some of the additional trees and also along the street as well. But if you want to apply this design criteria to a city, you need to have the potential for infiltration. So you need to have permeable ground, you need to have sufficient distance to groundwater, and you need to think about soil contamination. And of course, you need to have the availability of space. So you need to think about this. And if you want to apply this design strategy, this applies to traffic areas, so including footpaths and parking lots, but you can also apply it to existing roadside planting or to existing green spaces. If they have a quality deficit and you want to redesign it anyway, then it makes sense to think about it if you could infiltrate stormwater on site as well. Another case study and a different approach has been taken by Rotterdam. They are turning grey temporarily into blue. And similar to Dordrecht, Rotterdam is 2 meters below sea level on average. So they have a really complex pumping system to keep the city dry. And therefore infiltration is not that easy in Rotterdam. And they started with an interdisciplinary planning instrument. It's called Waterplan 2. And at the beginning, they analyzed for each catchment in the city, where do they need to provide additional water storage capacity to keep the city safe and dry. And these are all the areas in red where they need to provide additional storage. And what they did, they added a temporary layer on top of the urban fabric, and it's a temporary blue network. And here you can see how it works. You can see it only as when it rains. Otherwise, you won't even recognize this network. And for this network, they invented a special adaptation measures. They call it Waterplaza. We heard about this from Dordrecht. So they added some basins into an urban square. And normally, you can use this urban square for football, for basketball, whatever, or you can just hang around, or you can skate along this basin. And in case of an extreme storm event, this basin fills up temporarily, and then it keeps all the rest of the city in the surrounding dry. And if you want to apply this strategy, it makes sense if you have no potential for infiltration. For example, if you haven't got an permeable ground, or if you have your groundwater is too high, or you have soil contamination, or you just don't have the availability of space for infiltration. And this applies to district squares, to playgrounds and sport fields, but you can also use parking lots. You just need to check that the people still have dry feet if they want to get to their cars. Or you can also use streets, or at least parts of the streets, to convey the water to these water squares. We also have different situations. We heard about London and the river system in London. So you have also open water bodies, and especially in the more dense areas, they are more or less channelized, or they are piped. And if we think about that we have more impervious surfaces or also more extreme rain events, sometimes the capacity of this system is not sufficient anymore. So it makes then sense to think about a different approach. And I had a look at Singapore, and they turned gray and blue permanently into blue-green. And this is a typical situation. Singapore, they have all these concrete channels all over the city to convey the stormwater as quick as possible. And it's definitely not a beautiful situation. And what they did, they added, where they can, where they have the space, a blue-green network on top of the city. And here you can see they combined the water system with the surrounding green space. But what you also can see, you need a lot of space for doing it. But what you can do, just by digging or by changing the topography, you can provide enough capacity as much as you need for your stormwater runoff. And at the same time, you can provide additional benefit for biodiversity issues, but you can also improve the water quality if you, for example, integrate some cleansing biotopes. And here you can see how it looks like. Before it was a concrete channel here, and now they just redesigned it. They renaturated the river section, and the people are really getting contact with the water. They're really happy, and it's absolutely beautiful park right now. And the site conditions are slightly different here. You've got little potential for infiltration, but you definitely need to have space. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense to think about this design strategy. And this applies to river sections or piped river sections. You can also use a formally system of open trenches and ditches, but you need to have public space next to it, or you have to relocate streets. This will be done in some cases as well. Or you have to purchase private plots to have the space you need for the river and the surrounding park. I also had a look what all these cities are doing. So what kind of working steps are they going through in implementing the integrated stormwater management? And first of all, they're all set up an interdisciplinary team. And I think we probably all agree on this topic. And then they started to identify priority areas on a citywide scale. And they didn't only have a look at the water, but also on the public space. So where do they have a quality deficit? And they all considered the different urban structure types we have, because at the moment in Hamburg, we are only focusing on implementing sustainable urban drainage system on the private plot. But what are we doing in the inner city area? And this is, yeah, we are still in the discussion how we deal with this. Then you need to do some preliminary assessment. For example, you have to analyze your infiltration capacity, or you also need to analyze where do you have space available, because then you can decide for the right strategy you can choose. And we heard about this as well. I think it was key that we need to have a vision. We definitely need to have a vision. All the stakeholders know what you're talking about. So if you think, well, we want to have a green city, which doesn't only mean with climate mitigation, but also really in building a green city by implementing more green streets and trees, everybody knows what you're talking about. And this needs to be supported by a political resolution, because you have to spend a lot of money. And it's not only for a couple of years, it's over 10, 20, maybe 30 years, depends on the size of your city. And then you should start generating a citywide plan where you can set up all the different projects you have to deal with, or an integrated master plan. And then you definitely need to start with pilot projects. This is what all the cities have done, because in each city the conditions are slightly different. And what I learned from Hamburg, and it's probably similar in other cities, the members from the local authorities only believe in projects that are built in Hamburg, because they say, well, in Hamburg it's completely different. We can't just take the experience from other cities. And in this project, you can involve the public, and you can take their concerns on board, and you can try to involve them in the whole idea of sustainable urban drainage system as well. So now I'm coming to my conclusion. So if you apply these design strategies, you can create a sustainable urban development, and you can create space for water in very different ways, depending on your site conditions you've got in your city. And at the same time, you improve the quality of life in your city. And the public space really provides a big potential in doing it. You just need to have a closer look at this. And in most cases, the drivers are the legal requirements and also cost-benefit analysis. We heard about this already, so that you think, well, you can spend all the money in grey infrastructure, but what is really your benefit from a social aspect, from ecological aspects and things like this? And these design strategies are suitable for city with drainage problems, but when they also have quality deficits of open space. And it's necessary to set up, I call it an integrated stormwater management task force. It's a long term, but I think it makes clear that you really have to need a group of people who really pushes the idea forward. And you need to have these interdisciplinary planning instruments which combines all these different aspects. And then you have to go through these additional working steps, and then I think you can make sure to really implement an integrated approach. So I want to thank you, and also I listed some of my colleagues and some people from Hamburg Wasser who also contributed to this presentation, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Elke. And questions? Hamburg is always a little special, I think. Hamburg. I think Hamburg and all of Germany is often held for us anyway as a good example of awareness, environmental awareness, and you are at the forefront in many respects. Mm. How come you are that?
Sorry?
Why are you in the forefront?
Why? Huh.
What's so special about Germany?
I think we started thinking about environmental aspects probably in the late 70s, early 80s. And we already had quite a lot of ideas about sustainable or about decentralized drainage systems. But what we missed so far in Germany really to think about all these aspects related to design quality. Because at the beginning, the whole process was driven by engineers. Mm-hmm. With an ecological background, but not really with a planning background. Mm-hmm. And I think we are quite ahead, or we have been ahead for a long time in this aspect, but because we are not do a lot of publications in English, a lot of people missed our ideas and all the experience we've got. And I think that's one of the problems, because the engineers, they don't really like talking English. So.
Sprechen Sie Deutsch? A little, yes, a little, too little.
Yeah.
Okay, no questions? Okay, thank you, Elke.
Okay.